2014 by John Katos, who's on the call from American University of Sharjah, and Robert McNulty from Bentley College. And the aim of the working group is to advance the discussion and promote scholarship and research on the question of the role of the private sector in fragile and conflict-affected environments, and the potential of the private sector, especially in enhancing sustainable peace or not. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Luisa. Of course, we're always open for any ideas on future collaboration. And in a moment, I'll also share the websites that we have, where we have an online repository of publications. But before I do that, I'd like to turn it over to Luisa to tell us more about Prime.
Thank you so much, Christina, and welcome everyone. It is a true pleasure to be part of the webinar today, and also, of course, in the presence of a VIP of the B4P area. Pressure. As Christina said, my name is Luisa Murphy. I've been with Prime for, I guess it's been about 1.5 years now. I can't believe it. I am a senior manager for our global impact. That includes our partnerships, fundraising, working groups, and leadership education programs. And I would love to tell you a little bit about what these 4 letters stand for. Prime, also known as the Principles for Responsible Education, was started in 2007. As the name also indicates, it is a United Nations sponsored initiative and a sister initiative of the UN Global Compact. It was started in 2007 by an international task force of deans, faculty members, and other important stakeholders, also in the UN system, with really this vision that we needed to raise the sustainability profile of business schools around the world. And the key idea behind that also was, if you want to change business and our current and future leaders, then you need to change the way business is being taught. To do this, we work through 6 principles, and these 6, I'll be happy to provide a link to our 6 principles, but these 6 principles provide future leaders and current leaders, of course, with the skills they need to address sustainable development goals by aligning with the UN Global Compact. Give you an idea of our reach around the world. We are a very global network. As you might imagine, we have over 870 signatories. We operate in over 95 countries, and we, like the UN Global Compact, have regional chapters that serve as our arms and legs all over the world, promoting the 6 principles and working with business schools. And last but not least, we have 9 working groups that we're extremely proud of, the B4P working group being an exemplary working group as well, and one of the 9. Our Prime working groups focus on thematic issues related to the SDGs, and of course, aligning with the UN Global Compact issues. These working groups are comprised of international experts and researchers, and as Christina suggested, our working groups promote awareness and different publications on these issues for use by stakeholders, the private sector, business, faculty and educators, deans, civil society, and the list goes on. Yeah, it's just a privilege to be with you, and I'll be happy to share more information about our working groups and about Prime. And I don't want to take any more time up from this very important webinar today, so I'll hand it back to Christina, and thank you for your interest and time today. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Luisa. So we can go ahead and turn over to the presentation part of our webinar, which will then follow by hopefully an ample Q&A session with Tim. I'd briefly just like to introduce him. He has a professorship in business ethics and is a professor of business law and ethics at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University. Tim has written numerous books, journal articles. He served as a dissertation advisor to the new generation of academics who focus on the space of business for peace, peace through commerce, business ethics. So it's a huge honor to have him on the call today. And I'd like to turn it over to Tim. Thank you.
Well, thank you, both of you, for welcoming me today and for the introductions and the pressure that you have put on me here already here this morning. And it's great to see, one, a lot of familiar faces on my screen, as well as a lot of folks on the screen. And I know we have some here and some that will be watching on recording. There weren't necessarily a lot of folks that would have been watching this 25 years ago when I started to write about this stuff. And really, one of the great joys of my career has been to see how this area has grown, because it's remarkable to see what has happened, the fabulous work that has been done in this field with the new generation of scholars. When Cindy Scapani at Michigan and I first started to write this, we were very modest of what we were saying we were trying to do. We were saying we were trying to make a plausible argument. We're both lawyers. So we're saying we were trying to make a plausible argument of why there might be a connection between business and peace. And our challenge was to encourage others who had other disciplinary strengths to figure that out. And you all are. And so, I mean, we were coming up with some ideas, conceptual ideas of how that might happen, but it's been really wonderful to see that. Again, I see some familiar faces on here who are great, but I did want to single out one person, and that's John Katzo. See, John said, I told you I was going to talk about you. I mean, it's as a teacher, some of you may have experienced this, and if not, you will experience this, or I hope you have the opportunity to experience it. It's great that when you can see kind of the fruit of your work and recognition and stuff like that. I mean, we all like that kind of stuff. But it is awesome when you see one of your former students do the kind of things that John is doing. And I'm so proud of him, of what he's done in this area generally, and also with this particular program. And I just wanted to give him a call out and let you all know that I just think it's fabulous of what he's done. And I feel just very, very proud to see a former student of mine. And there's a few of those others that are around too, but one of my former students of mine doing taking the leadership that he has. Christina asked me very dangerously, actually, if I might tell a little bit of the story of how I got into this. I said, you're opening a can of worms here, that once I start storytelling that we could be here for 6 hours or something like that, but I'll try to make it brief. So I was at the University of Michigan. I'm a business ethics professor, and I was about ready to go up for tenure. In fact, I tried to go up for tenure early, and they said, no, we don't want you to do that because it violates our norms. And if you're going to leave, we'll do it. But otherwise, we would prefer you wait your turn. And of course, that always gives this sense of nerves of, oh, am I going to make it? Are they giving me some other signal? What's going on here? And the dean really did me a great favor. He sat down with me. He said, Tim, you're going to get it next year. Just don't worry about it. You're good. Just don't worry about it. And so I thought about that. I said, okay, well, if that's the case, tenure is this weird thing. I mean, where, other than Supreme Court justices or something like that, do you see that you have lifetime employment? And I said, I want to take this seriously. What's a question that's big enough and strange enough that it's okay to fail at? If I can look back at my career, and I said, I took a shot at something and it didn't work, but it was a good effort. And my undergrad is from Notre Dame. Christina mentioned that I now have an affiliation as of about 6 days ago with the Kroc Institute. And I'd always been interested, my PhD is in theology. And so I'd always had this interest of peace, mainly more from my theology background. And I would go to Kroc and to Notre Dame to see what was on the bookshelves and read about peace studies. And I just thought it was interesting stuff. I was finishing my first major academic book with Oxford University Press on ethics and governance, and looking at corporate culture and trying to have a synthesis of various ethical theories and stuff like that. And from my readings, though, with Kroc and what they were leading me to, I found some of these anthropological studies that tried to characterize what relatively nonviolent societies look like. There are articles written by David Fabro, a book written by Raymond Kelly. And I was noticing that there was a lot of overlap of what they were attributing to be characteristics of nonviolent societies and what I was writing about in my Oxford book. And that was the moment I said, I wonder I wonder if you can make an argument of a reason to be ethical in business is because it actually might make the world more peaceful. That's an interesting idea. I mean, that's an idea worth failing at. And because business ethics it's more current these days. At the time, there's more acceptance than there was 25 years ago or so. But it was like, why be ethical? Why worry about this stuff? Well, it's going to pay off in the long run. It keeps you out of legal trouble. It's a leadership thing that you can do. But I thought if you added to that, that it actually has a consequence that might be more peaceful, more likely that if corporations did this on a regular basis, that someone's head might not get blown off, literally, then that's worth going after. And so I said, okay, I'm going to sell out the next 10 years of my career just to try to figure this out. I coerced, dragooned, whatever, my great colleague, Cindy Scapani, who was a corporate governance professor, into working with me on it, because Cindy had tremendous credibility. And she thought the idea was interesting, but she had tremendous credibility at Michigan. And if she was on board, people would say, oh, okay, well, if Cindy's on board, it must not be stupid. But people were looking at us, our colleagues, and advising us to stop. I mean, senior colleagues said, you're going to end your career talking about crazy stuff like this. Leave it alone. But Cindy and I decided that we were going to have a conference on it in 2001 with the awkward title of, what was it? Stakeholder accountability, corporate responsibility, and sustainable peace, or something. It was a real mouthful of whatever we came up with. And not only were we not getting any registrations for the conference, which was going to be a 2-day conference in Ann Arbor, but we couldn't get any speakers for the same reason. You people have lost your mind. And a few friends said, okay, we'll speak. I think mainly because they felt sorry for us. But no one, we were looking at maybe having 8 people at this 2-day conference. And then 9/11 hit. And our conference wasn't on terrorism or stuff like that. But at that moment, everybody wanted to do something. Everybody wanted to say something. Everybody wanted to be together on something that was connected with peace. And if business had an angle on it, they're interested parties in business too, of, is there something that can be done that we can do? And suddenly we had people who were interested in trying out some ideas, and we had a completely full conference. And we came up with our first publication. It was a special issue of the Vanderbilt Journal of Transnational Law. We did the same thing a couple more times, and then we were off and running. And it really took off from there. My experience has been, maybe yours is different, that like the field of business ethics, that the field of business and peace is not something that had a straight line. I think more and more people are going into their PhD programs, and bless them that they are, of saying that this is something that I want to go after. But for a lot of us, it's kind of been a circular route of how we got into this. And I'm so glad that I got into this. I mean, it's been 10 years, as that was 15 years ago. It's now been 25 years that I'm looking at it, and in increasingly new ways. So that's kind of the stories of how I got here, in case that's helpful for you to resonate with. I know that in talking to this particular group, I don't have to explain business and peace, but I do want to situate myself of what component of business and peace that I do want to talk about. And 25 years ago, I didn't have to do this because there was no spot. I mean, you did it. You were the only kind of person that was out there. There was no different, sub-disciplines or, political regulation, or they're talking about social entrepreneurship, or we're looking at zones of conflict and what corporations do in zones of conflict and all those kinds of this. There's a lot of those sub areas, as there should be when a new academic field is growing. And it's been terrific to see that. I don't do any of that. I just want to let you know, I don't do it. That's not what I do. I don't do zones of conflict. I don't do regulatory action. I do a little bit maybe with social entrepreneurship and a little bit with instrumental corporate policy. But what I do is kind of when I talk to business people and I say, you're making a contribution to peace. And they say, I did what? What? I never thought of that before. But my argument has been that actually unintentional peacemaking may be one of the better ways that we can build peace. And it goes back to the story that I told in that I was looking for a way to advance the notion of business ethics and ethical corporate culture. And I was finding these peacemaking ways of doing that consistent with it. And so I am content with encouraging corporations to think about how to build positive, constructive cultures, because I believe in doing that, it has a spillover effect, even if they're unaware of it. Now, if they are aware of it, if they can see that there's another reason to do what they are already doing, or to do it better, or more systematically, or with more passion, that's even better. But my spot of where I sit, although I cheer, I do handstands, I think what everybody else is doing is great. I think it's awesome. But what I do are these very small incremental things that I think have an impact over time on corporate culture and on peace. And so that's what I'm focused on. And so that will make more sense of what I'm going to be talking about when I talk about cultural impacts or cultural foundations of peace or cultural nudges and bridges. Now, just to go one further thing, one other starting point, you'll see this referenced in different ways, and I'm totally delighted with both ways. Back in 2003, in the first book that Cindy and I wrote, The Role of Business in Fostering Peaceful Societies with Cambridge, we proposed these 4 ways in which businesses can contribute to peace. I saw Jen Etzel on the call too, that we did an article, Jen and Jorge and Michelle Westerman Mihailo and I did an article together where we used these as well. And Jen was the lead author on that. And so this gets incorporated in some of that. So sometimes you'll see it with Jen as the lead on that, which is great. But you could see it kind of either, and we added a few more things into it as well, but you'll see these kind of in different kind of sources, but and people refer to it each way. It's kind of pretty much the same thing. But the four developments, I'm not going to go through all these because I think you probably already know it, was economic development, companies being profitable, creating employment opportunities, having managerial and technological transfer, and differentiating the economy away from commodities. You see the parenthetical there. The parenthetical is the economic component also has a direct analog to the building of corporate culture that I have argued for years, that I call total integrity management, which is comprised of 3 kinds of trust: hard trust, real trust, is good trust. And the real trust dimension is the economic payoff that you have in constructing economic behavior. And so, and that is connected to a set of biological and scientific characterizations done by Bill Frederick of recurring values that occur throughout all of nature. And so I mention those simply because these are building blocks that I didn't just come out of, didn't pull out of nowhere from. They were built in some naturalistic science that was applied to business ethics that then extrudes, which was one of Frederick's favorite words. I love that word, extrudes, into business and peace in terms of economic development. The second one was rule of law. You all get that, but that goes to what I call hard trust or coercive dimension of a regulatory component that people are trusted in business because there's a regulatory activity that holds them accountable, and that extrudes from what Frederick calls power aggrandizing values. And so you see the importance of dispute resolution, avoidance of bribery. I mean, I've told corporations that there's 2 things that you can do in order to have a more sustainable or a culture that contributes to peace as well as being ethical: tougher policies on bribery, more support of gender equity. You do those 2 things, you'll go a long way. And those are 2 things that a company can do. They don't have to say, well, I can't do anything about it. It's the government or the NGO. Corporations can do something about it. And the third, which is more my favorite, is the building of a sense of a community, which I also call good trust, which is more of an inspiring thing, which Frederick calls ecologizing values. And you see the last thing in each one of these have a political component dimension to it as well, where it hooks onto work that is done by people like Joseph Nye of Sticky Power, Sharp Power, and Soft Power. So I mention these because there's a root to these and there's a connecting link to all these, and they're not just come out from nowhere. And one part of community is social responsibility, good citizenship. We all get that. But the other is the internal dimension of giving people a voice in their work, which is a democratic kind of a value. And there's some decent history of democratic kinds of cultures, not necessarily resorting to violence against each other anyway. Gender equity, sizes of organizations so that the sizes are constructed within the organization so that people have face-to-face interaction with each other, because if you have face-to-face interaction with each other, it's harder to be nasty to them because your actions have consequences. When people think that they don't have any consequences to their action in a large organization, then the importance of ethical action kind of falls by the wayside. And then I go back and forth on track 2 diplomacy. Sometimes, I love to use the example I'm sure you all know from Thomas Friedman of how General Electric helped mediate the India-Pakistan dispute, 20 years ago. But I don't know. I was doing a presentation at Notre Dame quite a while ago, and I had a political science said, "Do you really trust business in order to resolve what's going on in Ukraine right now? Do you really trust them, the business people, to have all those diplomatic sensitivities in order to be able to know what to do?" I was like, that's a good point. So sometimes I include that as a 4th dimension, and sometimes I don't. So, but those are the 4 contributions. All right, that's the foundation here. So the subsequent argument then. Well, actually, let me tell you a story to get into this. So I left George Washington. I went from Michigan in 2005 to George Washington University, where they gave me a chair in business ethics. And of course, GW isn't just the right town to be in if you want to try to talk about some of these issues and interact with good people. It's in the right neighborhood. Foggy Bottom. I would literally run into the sidewalk people that I wanted to talk to. It was a great spot. And so that's where a lot more of my writing ended up coming. But then in 2013, I came out here to Indiana University, again, mainly for health reasons, because the smog got to my lungs just as the cold got it to in Ann Arbor. Although I'm a Midwesterner, and so I'm really, really comfortable here. This is a fabulous, fabulous location. But I was thinking, so Bloomington, Indiana, is that really the spot to be doing more of this stuff that I'm doing on business and peace? It seems more Washington, D.C. What am I going to do here? So I had mentioned that I have a musical background, and my kids, at the time, they were 6 and 9, my sons, were taking music lessons at the Jacobs School of Music here. And the Jacobs School of Music, if you don't know, gets ranked by many people as the finest school of music in the world. And obviously you'll have arguments from Juilliard and Eastman and several other places like that, but it is damn good. It is, I look at the people who are at the Jacobs School of Music, they're like the doctors at Johns Hopkins or Mayo. They just are on a different planet from everybody else. They're just amazing. So I'm waiting outside of their practice room, and I'm noodling around and teaching a class and corporate culture and stuff like that. And it suddenly struck me. I said, why couldn't you use music to be a nudge to put people in different orientations, different states of mind, where they might approach a dilemma in a different way depending on what that state of mind is? Well, I thought that was another one of those moments like, that's an interesting thing to think about. And I ended up auditing a doctoral course on music and philosophy over Jacobs, which was fabulous. It was just fabulous. But I realized that I really needed to hone my old musical theory knowledge, which had kind of gone by the wayside. So I had to get permission from the person who runs the general studies program over at the Jacobs School, a woman named Connie Knapp, to get permission to audit an undergraduate course with freshman and sophomore music theory classes. Well, I started the conversation with Connie, and we were 2 minutes into the conversation, and I found out that she teaches a course called The Music of War and Peace. You can imagine we were off to the races at that point. I went ahead and took the courses, but Connie and I have done 4 conferences now on music, business, and peace. We just had a book that was released by Rutledge under their new Business and Peace series. And we brought together about 20, 25 scholars who tried to noodle this around, very much like Cindy and I did back in 2001, of people just kind of trying some things out. That gave me the energy and the background to start working on this more. I'm about to, in fact, I was supposed to get the contract last week. My editor says it's all set, but I'm going to be doing a book with Georgetown that's going to take this further, of what I'm going to be calling cultural nudges and bridges, cultural artifacts, and how they help us make better decisions and how they might provide common ground for people who disagree with each other. So, and this is the argument. The premise is that by interacting with cultural artifacts such as music, sports, film, Even our dogs, my three are right back here, fortunately they're quiet, can nudge us to make better decisions. And the same artifacts can be common ground for Americans or others who disagree with each other on social political issues. So there's two parts to that. One, music, sports, and other cultural artifacts have another one of my favorite words that I first was introduced to by one of our conference participants from the University of Texas, Kathleen Higgins. I don't know if she invented this, but this is just a word that we should all know to sound really, really impressive. Psychophysiological impact. I never heard that word, but isn't that an awesome word? A psychophysiological impact. Wow, you sound really good when you say something like that. A psychophysiological impact in our cognitive orientations so that we view situations and decisions differently. And that cognitive mindset can range from an us versus them orientation to one that is joyful. Part two, then, is the same cultural artifacts offer common grounds for those who might otherwise disagree with each other. And the workplace holds one of the places for experimenting of what that might look like. So I'm going to talk just about music a little bit, but this is going to apply, and I'm going to explain the explanation in my book, to these other artifacts like sports, film, things like that. So music as an exemplar, the psychophysiological impact. I have done the presentation on the next slide, by the way, not just to academics. My wife is an addictions counselor, and she has me come into some of her groups. And these are people who are recovering from alcohol, drug abuse, and they're trying to get their lives back. And I go in there. Now, what is it? You can imagine then someone in addiction, they look at most of them are pretty young. They look at this 63-year-old dude coming in here wanting to talk about music. And it's like, oh man, this is going to be bad. This is just going to be a bad, bad hour. But I start playing my tunes. I'll show you my tunes. I won't play them because we don't have time for it, but you'll recognize the tunes. That I start playing the tunes to them. And at first, they're all like this. But pretty soon, they start nodding their head to the tune and their arms start to relax. And you can see the arms start to pat on their shoulder or their toes start to tap the floor. And after the end of it, you even see people start swaying. Music does something to our bones. Music isn't something that we just listen to. It does something to our entire somatic creation. It has an impact on us. We are musical creatures. We are musical creatures, and music suffuses us when we hear it. It does something to us. It changes the way that we think. And so that's the premise. That was one of the starting points, that music has a difference of the way that we look at things. There's a lot of research that is going on right now in the field of business ethics that's long overdue. I mean, it's new, but I mean, David Hume was talking about this hundreds of years ago, that most of our ethical decisions aren't made on the basis of rational decision-making, although we may go back and understand the rationality for why we make a particular decision, but it's much more based on our emotions. And so one way to think about it is, are there constructive ways to tap into those emotions? And I'm saying that music is one of them. Now, let me be cautious here for a second. Some people say, well, music is the universal language. Sort of. I mean, it is true that we all resonate with music. Just about it's very difficult to find someone who doesn't resonate with music, but we all have different music. I mean, I'm sure that on this screen right now, that if we all played our favorite music, that some of you are going to say, oh man, that really sucks. I mean, they don't like each other's music. I mean, that happens, but so to that extent, there are all kinds of cultural differences, just like there's all kinds of cultural differences on everything about what music that people like. However, there's a couple of things that are worth noting. One is, there is some music that is truly universal. It's called IDS, or infant directed speech, or sometimes it's called motherese, that parents sing to their children around the world in exactly the same way. That kind of cooing, lullaby kind of a thing, kind of a way. And so there is some commonality. There's also a component, and I'm hopefully going to play you something here in a second that comes through, of what happens if you hear something repeated, that we are so musical that we make words into music. Now let me see if I can get here. I'm going to end the show here for a second. There's psychologist at University of California at San Diego, Diana Deutsch, who years ago, the story goes, was listening to her old answering machine. Remember old answering machines that you had on your desk or whatever? And she heard a message that got repeated. And as she was repeating it, it turned into not a message, but a tune. And this is so universal. Listen when this is played to a bunch of little kids and their reaction. I'm going to put my mic here closest to the audio. This won't be really loud, but I think that you'll be able to get it. Just listen to the words and the music and see what the kids do with this.
Good morning, Mr. Who? That's right. Would you all wave and say hello, Professor Deutsch? Professor Deutsch, I just explained to this class what I think might happen by listening to the next example, but I haven't told them, or they haven't heard any examples yet. So just to give you a little background as you're watching this video or DVD, I'm going to try to make it into a DVD for her. They've never heard the example. I feel like I'm a magician. You've never met me before, have you? So let's see if you can hear what I think you're going to hear, you guys.
The sounds as they appear to you are not only different from those that are really present, but they sometimes behave so strangely as to seem quite impossible. But they sometimes behave so strangely. They sometimes behave so strangely. Sometimes behave so strangely.
Try it.
Sometimes behave so strangely.
Go ahead.
Sometimes behave so strangely. 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 So strangely. So strangely. So strangely. So strangely.
So did you hear the melody?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me get back out of this. There we go. So we are so musical that we end up making music even when music wasn't there. And so I think this is something that we can play with. We can play with in terms of in the mute place, in the workplace. And there's lots of literature on this. Once you start getting into it, just kind of overflowing. That there are some arguments. All of these have some counter arguments and critics that if you have a diatonic scale, that it tends to produce more happiness. There's music of narratives. Daniel Levitin has said, there's 6 songs that are universal, and you see them listed. You see music as a way to express pain, a work to express your work. Music is something, it is a language, it is a mechanism that plays into our emotions. And the same can be done with these other cultural artifacts too. Now, because I do want to say sometimes a question answer, this is really kind of really the heart of where my work is right now. So my argument, again, there are nudges that can help us make better decisions. And some of those nudges are particularly predisposed to be able to allow us to find common ground with others with whom we may disagree with. What you see on this slide is actually a riff on Lawrence Kohlberg's 6 Stages of Moral Development with some adaptations from Carol Gilligan's more feminist approach. And what I do, I've done with this my students. This has produced thousands of songs right now and hundreds of examples of how this is used to bridge differences in the workplace. At this point, I've just got stacks of this stuff that I need to sort through and put into categories and stuff. But there are 6 steps or 6 ways that, first of all, that you can look at a sports game. And then I ask students to find a piece of music that puts them in that psychological category. So one is an us versus them kind of a category, which is a rivalry, a component. I mean, sometimes you have to fight, sometimes you have to compete. And for me, if I want to put myself into that position, this is just my song, I would listen to theme from Rocky. Bum bum ba ba bum ba ba bum ba ba bum 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 ba ba bum ba ba bum ba ba bum. You know the song, and now I've sung. So the next one, rules. If I am wanting to put myself into that I've been procrastinating, and I need to get down to business. I need to be structured. I need to be disciplined. One of the ways that I do it is to listen to the hymns from one of the U.S. military academies, like the Naval Academy. Anchors away, my boys. I mean, that's going to put you into, I mean, if the military academy can't put you in an element of discipline, I don't know what can. So if I want to listen to a component that puts you, again, I'm not making these up. These are drawn. These are just reframed from Kohlberg's empirical studies and Gilligan's of our psychological moral development. If you want to do friendship, that I would listen to, Theme from Friends. I'll be there for you. You know that song. If I want to listen to something that gives me a sense of joy, I might listen to, Happy. You all remember Happy from a few years ago, or Walking on Sunshine or something like that, that just puts you in this joyous mood. If I want to have a sense of perspective, where I'm stepping back and kind of looking at the world, sometimes I say in sports, looking down from the view from the blimp, to see, to take a step back and appreciate where we are, then I might listen to Top of the World, either by a contemporary group like Imagine Dragons, or back in my day with the Carpenters. If I want to listen to a sense that puts me in a sense of transcendence, that's taken me beyond all of the world and merging kind of with the universe, I'll go back to my classical roots and listen to the Hallelujah Chorus. And where I differ from Kohlberg, and to some extent Gilligan too, is that I don't believe that we necessarily linearly progress this. I think that we are in each one of these stages at any given time of the day, in which case I will listen to the 1960s group, The Byrds, who took King Solomon's "To everything that there is a season and a purpose to everything under the sun, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to hate, a time to love." You all know that. And so that we can move between all these. So what I ask students to do, you ought to do it too. One of the reasons you ought to do it, I told my students that you ought to do it so that if you are at work and you realize, or any place, and you realize that you're not quite in the state of mind that you need to be, take some time and pick out these 6 songs, play the song, and it'll help you get back in the state of mind that you want to be. I mean, this is a really actually useful tool that people can use in the workplace. And the ones that I have highlighted there are ones that are particularly put you into a psychological orientation where you might be open to someone who disagrees with you. Now, if you're in an us versus them state of mind, you may not be. And one of the problems that we have in the world today is there's lots of us's and them'isms. Now, I think that we all need to have an us. And so I think us and them isn't necessarily a bad thing, but us versus them is a problem. But I'm worried about that. And transcendence just is a little bit too airy, I think, maybe to put us in there. But I think that understanding rules, processes, rule of law, having a sense of friendship, having a sense of joy, giving a sense of perspective. If you listen to one of those tunes, you're a little bit more likely to be willing to have a conversation with someone that you disagree with. You may not agree with them, but you could have the conversation. And that takes me to the bridge part. So this is how you make decisions. And this not only applies in making peace or harmony in the workplace, that can be on anything that you do in the workplace, whatever project that you're working on at that particular moment. But I think that there's a particular use for it in terms of creating bridges. And so bridges, these cultural artifacts, music, sports, film, all these kinds of things, can also provide ways for us to find common ground that we disagree with each other. Let me just talk about 2 of them. One is food. I interviewed for a vlog a former state senator in the state of Ohio, who was the leader of the Democratic Party. And one of the things that she talked about was that before legislation, this was 10 years ago, when there actually still was some bipartisan notion or people willing to talk with each other in the United States, that she would bring food in and they would eat together before they went onto the floor. And it made a difference, she believes, just in the quality of the debate that they had. Another example, go back up to sports. I grew up in the downstate part of Illinois, but I got my PhD at Northwestern in the Chicago area. And I had a professor named Dave Messick, who was one of the first psychologists to enter into the field of business ethics. And one of Dave's favorite analogies was that you can have 2 people one from Chicago, one from downstate Illinois, who are vociferously opposed to each other on all kinds of social and political issues, arguing all the time. I remember my dad, downstate Illinois, consistently refer to Chicago and anyone who lived in Chicago as someone from Sodom and Gomorrah from the Bible. I mean, it was not a pleasant framing of people from Chicago. And I lived in Chicago for 10 years, and the reverse was frequently true of people who lived in downstate Illinois. So there's a lot of animosity there. But 2 seconds later, the two people could be standing shoulder to shoulder, rooting for the Chicago Cubs baseball team. And Messick's argument is that the human brain is actually quite flexible of finding identity with someone else. And one of my arguments is that we need to find ways to find multiple identities with each other, not just our political identity of whether you're blue, red, green, purple, whatever, but that you have an identity, one identity, but you have other ways that you can find bridges with each other so that even if you disagree, you have a capability of having a civil conversation. I'll give you one more, then I will stop and wrap up here. I did a TED Talk in September. The TED Talk in the dog park. Because of the pandemic, the TED Talk people realized that they couldn't just get people in auditoriums like the classic TED Talk, a big auditorium, person walks on stage in the spotlight. And so I had a local person said, Tim, I know you work. How would you feel about doing a TED Talk in a dog park? Well, that's music. I'm a big dog guy. And I was like, that is worth doing. That is worth doing a TED Talk in a dog park. And so on a Sunday morning, I did. I went to the dog park. And one of my analogies was, I said, look, you got dogs going to the dog park, and they're very happy. And they get to go in the car with their pack. They're all excited, and they get to the dog park, and then there are other dogs that are arriving, and they're all excited, and they're with their family, they're with their pack, and then the dogs interact with each other. And if the dogs take a time to get to know each other, to get a couple of good smells in, then they're off to the races and they're playing. They've made new friends, they've made a new pack. They haven't given up their old pack. They still know who their family is, but they've been able to bridge that. Now, if they don't take that time, they can end up in a dogfight or think someone can get bitten and things are bad. But if they take the time to get to know each other a bit on other issues other than from what pack do I come, they can find a new identity, a new way to interact with each other. And my argument is that, that is just that it's a metaphor, but it's also a reality. If you go to people who are taking their dogs there, that they can find common ground. I had an incident here just 2 months ago when we were in a hotel. And of course, in the US, there's this huge debate on whether you have masks or not. And we were wearing masks, and there was a family there that they were with their dog and they didn't have masks. And one reaction is that put on your mask. And then when you're off to the races, our argument. And instead, our family said, what a cute dog. And we had a lovely conversation. Now, there's still an issue of whether or not people should be wearing masks or not. Wherever side you are on that, there's still an issue. But if we actually broached that issue, I am quite sure that we would have had a more constructive conversation, a more civil conversation, a more respectful conversation than if the dog hadn't been the mediator that allowed us to be able to converse with each other. I'm not saying that this is a magic wand. I am saying that right now, at least in the US, and I think in a lot of places around the world as well, we have to learn to take some baby steps of finding ways that we can connect with each other. And I think that cultural artifacts give us the possibility of being able to connect with each other. I think that that can happen in the workplace. And if it can happen in the workplace, and my argument is right, that if businesses are doing things that are more ethical and providing more harmony, that they can have a spillover effect to other parts of the world, then there's a contribution to business and peace as well. With that, I'll stop. We've got 10 minutes, I believe, for any questions, but obviously I can go on this one. I get pretty excited about this kind of stuff, and I can keep talking about that, but let me stop it. So we have, I think we got till 10 o'clock or 10 o'clock my time. We got 10 minutes for questions, don't we, Christina?
Exactly. Thanks so much, Tim. So for folks who have questions or comments, please feel free to unmute yourself and introduce yourself as well. So we don't necessarily need to wait for someone to push the raise hand function. Just feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself. If you also want to say hello, you're welcome to do that as well.
I've anesthetized you all.
No, I'll just say hi, Tim, Jennifer. I would just say
Jen.
that I just love your presentation, and it takes us to the next level. You know, you're always pushing the boundaries and introducing new ideas that are very inspirational. And I know that's your early work inspired me, and this has given me a lot to think about. I really think this is a fabulous contribution, especially given the times that we're living in. So thank you so much. I just wanted to say kudos.
Well, thanks, Jen.
Yeah.
There was someone else that was starting to speak. I think I stepped on them a little.
Yeah, I was going to speak up, Tim. I was quite taken by something you said that is a bit off topic, but I thought was quite a remarkable comment. When you said, I was looking for something worth failing at. And I'm wondering the origin of that. I find that quite a profound thought.
I don't know if I can trace the where I came up with it. I'm sure that it was in my family at some point. And it may, because my family is like that. I mean, it's we were in a I mean, we weren't rich. I mean, I grew up on a farm, and we were well-to-do in our area, but I know it was always impressed on us that, you know, we had real responsibilities, and that we should take risks in order to try to find ways to make life better. And it may come down to, this is going to sound really corny and really sappy, but I was a baseball player. That was really one of the big things that I did. I even had a tryout offer with the Milwaukee Brewers, which stupidly I didn't take them up on. But my sister one time, you know, said to me, you know, because I was hesitant of stealing second base, and she said, you know, Tim, you can't steal second base and keep your foot on first. And I remember at the time, I was maybe 12 years old at the time, that just really struck me. It's like, that's really true. You can't steal second. You have to take the risk. And I'd also remember her saying, if you get thrown out, you get thrown out. You'll get it next time. So maybe that's where it's from. That's probably the best I can trace it. But I do know that I knew it. I also know that I really, resent is the wrong word. I'm disappointed by people who look at tenure as this job sinecure, so now I don't have to do anything. I mean, my God, what a gift it is. And we work so hard for it. And if you look at the history of it, I mean, it was meant for people to go ahead and try out new things. And it just seems to me that if you've got this fantastic job opportunity, give it a whirl. See where you end up. So I'm not sure if that's a great answer or not, Bob, but I mean, that is something that, I mean, I do really believe that you ought to be willing, particularly in the kinds of positions that I'm in, of a tenured professor and an endowed chair and stuff like that. I mean, if I'm not willing to take a risk, who would take the risk? I mean, how badly can I fail? So anyway, I'll shut up. There was a question, Molly?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is so interesting, Tim. And I think I was having kind of the same thoughts as the last comment. It's so inspiring to see you really are kind of the true academic in terms of, you know, still taking classes as a tenured faculty member and really thinking how we can move this issue forward. And I think there's some really interesting policy implications for your work. And I'm wondering if you've thought at all about doing some kind of experiments or anything with the students that you have access to there, or thinking about, you know, how could we go out and see what are the impacts that, you know, music and dog parks are having in terms of bringing people together? Have you thought at all about bringing this into your classrooms and maybe controlling for people's biases when they walk in through an experimental type of setting.
So that's a great comment, Molly. And there's 2 or 3 responses to that. One is, in some ways, we're back to where I was 25 years ago. And that is, I'm not an empirical scholar. I'm not that good of a philosopher, frankly, for that matter, although I've taught business ethics for 36 years now. I do think that what I'm really good at is that I've had a lot of different experiences and like to try out different things, whether it's sports or dogs or music or bioanthropology or whatever. And I think I'm pretty good at seeing the ways that things can connect that people haven't seen how they connect before. I think that I'm pretty good at that. And it's one of the things that drew me to business and peace. But as I said, that when Cindy and I were starting to work on this 25 years ago, we're very humble of saying that we're making a plausible argument of why there is a connection between these two, but we challenge, ask, beg those who do have those skills to try this out. I remember Jerry Davis, who was a great empirical scholar at the University of Michigan, said, "Tim, you've got like 500 testable hypotheses and every 10 seconds you talk." And it's like, well, it could be, but I don't know what to do with any of them. So, I mean, to the extent that these are ideas that, someone like you who has, empirical skills can run with and do better with, I'll be cheering you all the way. I think that's great. They're not necessarily skills that I know how to do, but I think it's a fabulous idea if people would take that. The more anecdotal things that I would say, I'll make 2 quick comments so we can get another question in here, is there are some groups, like some of you may be familiar with Braver Angels, that try to get in the US Republicans and Democrats to sit down across a table, sometimes for hours, to talk with each other. And they report that one of the things that they find as the conversation starter is to talk about their dog or to talk about the sports. I mean, in some ways, this is so simple. In fact, one of the reviewers of my Georgetown book said, "This is so simple. Why didn't anybody think about this before Fort did?" Because it's like almost like, how's the weather? What do we have in common? It's very easy stuff, but we've forgotten about it. So it's baby steps. So Braver Angels, I know, finds this. And I can tell you that in my class, it makes an enormous difference that students are just excited, whether it's undergraduates or online, of, wow, here's a way that we can talk to it. Because I can tell you right now, undergraduates in particular are sick and tired of the animosity and the bickering. They've had it. They're wondering what the hell happened to you old people, so you can't talk about a damn thing. They are really pissed off about the whole thing. And they're looking for ways that they can be different than us. And so it's really had a big impact, but that's anecdotal. I would love for people on this call or others that you talk to who get this idea and say, I'll run an experiment on this or something like that. And rather, I'm happy to share the exercises they do. They're very, very simple, and see what we come up with and advance the field. That's the way I started 25 years ago. And that's the way I'm looking at what we're doing right now with this adaptation. Mark, you had a hand.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. My name is Mark van Dor, and I'm working on this topic for quite a number of years, not as an academic, but more as a practitioner. But with all the people in this, almost everyone in this room. So, and I was very inspired also by your work, so that I wanted to thank you for that. And one thing you said about sports really struck me, because 2 things came to mind when you talked about Chicago, which is the series The Last Dance. I don't know if you saw it. If you saw it, but
I didn't see it, but I lived and died with the Bulls in the 90s when they were doing it.
Right. Well, you should definitely watch it. It's an amazing story, of course. You know the story about Michael Jordan, but the way it's like presented, and I think it can be something to show to people the power of sports and how it can unite people. But the other thing that I noticed was, I kept thinking back of the little conversations I always have with like customs officials or policemen or military whenever I go to a fragile setting. And, and I always start talking about sports. because it always breaks the ice, you know? So the last time I was in Iraq 2 months ago, I was walking into the wrong door, and then this policeman came up to me, and he looked really like scary, you know, big mustache, broad, and I was like wondering, is he going to arrest me or not? So he asked me where I was from. I said from the Netherlands. Oh, so the country of Johan Cruyff, Van Basten, Gullit. Names that maybe don't sound familiar to some of you, but like the big players in the Netherlands that everybody around the world knows. So immediately there was this conversation we had about, sports and about our common passion. And, literally the tension was gone. So the question I have, like, is this something that we can also use in terms of like, what I often notice in especially the parties that are opposing each other, and this goes on different levels. It could be like between neighbors, but also between like warring parties or conflict armed groups that are not communicating to each other. Is there a way we can use this, what your theory, let's say, and sort of, I don't know, make it into a training for people? Because it's really amazing what it can do, but it seems like not everybody has the capacity to do it. You know what I mean?
Tim, may I just ask you, sorry to jump in, could you maybe in your response to Mark also include your any concluding remarks you may have?
Yeah, because we are at the time. Yeah, I realize. Since we're past time, I was going to tell you my favorite sports story, but instead, let me say this, that I have started I don't know if you call it a video blog or an audio blog, it's a little bit of both, that will be at least monthly. I'm hoping that it'll be bi-weekly, that I'm going to make available, that tells in 10-minute increments 2 stories about how one of these cultural artifacts can help us bridge. And the story that I was going to tell about a women's softball game and helping your opponent who was injured, it will be in one of those. But I'll send that information so that this could be an ongoing thing and an ongoing conversation. And very much, I would love to see something that comes out of it. I don't know the form for it or the host for it, but some sort of a training program, some sort of an ongoing program. It's one of the reasons that I'm writing a book with Georgetown now, and I have ideas for a follow-up book that would be outside of the workplace. So, I mean, this is something that, this is the next 5-10 years, and it's hoping that I want to do. So there's an opportunities for continued conversation. A final remark, I'm just going to say thank you all. Not just thank you all for being here today. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I mean, seriously, it inspires me, and it makes me so happy to see what people are doing with these ideas that people were telling me 25 years ago were career enders. And so I'm really grateful for all you're doing and the continued work of this particular working group. Thanks for having me. And I beg, I ask, I challenge you to take any ideas that I said today, run with them, make them more concrete, make them more empirical, run with them. I'll be your biggest cheerleader.
Thank you so much, Tim. I mean, really, it's honestly, it was such an honor to have you. I mean, so many of us have leaned on your work in our work, to build up or to support our work and counter it, of course, as well. And it's been inspiring to hear of this new research stream. And also, I think we just have a lot of respect for you as a person. Your outlook on life is inspiring. I think Bob really was spot on when he, asked you about the comment that you made. Find an idea worth failing at. I think that's a perfect way to end our webinar. Thank you. For those of you who follow our email stream, we usually send out emails after a recording or after a webinar has been wrapped up, and we share the link of the recording. And we will do that just as we have with other webinars, with Tim's talk today. So we can also share that link, disseminate it to our respective networks. We'll also include some information on this new blog that Tim started about a month ago. And we just added John Kotzo's presentation from the webinar that he presented at in December. So I included the link to our website in the chat if you'd like to go and see it. For anyone who's interested in presenting, please will reach out to Bob and I. The next webinars on the horizon will be Jonathan and Caleb, that is from the RMIT University in Australia, with Australian Red Cross. They created a module on IHL for future business leaders. And we also have Molly Mellon, who's here on the call, who will hopefully secure a date for her to present her new book. So please look out for those emails that we will be sending to you in the near future. And thanks again for joining the call. Take
Bye,
care.
everybody.